hear anybody.
You've got some outer space noises coming from over there, Debbie.
Great.
All right, I guess I'll go ahead and get our meeting called to order. It is 6:31 p.m. Called this meeting of the Community Development Committee to order in consideration of the COVID-19 social distancing recommendations. This meeting is being held virtually via Zoom. The public is invited to participate and is allowed to make comments through the online chat feature. Please note that your comments will be visible to the group. If you wish to make a public comment, please state your name and city of residence for the record and be conscientious of others trying to speak. This meeting will be recorded and posted on the city's website at missionks.org. Please contact the administration offices at 913-676-8350 with any questions or concerns. First up is public comments, which is the time for comments on items not on the agenda, but I don't see anyone dialed in right now. So we'll go ahead and move on to public presentations, informational only. And we do not have any public presentations or hearings this evening, so we will move into our action items. Our first action item is acceptance of the Community Development Committee minutes from Audrey McClanahan.
Thank you. Yes, these are the March 3rd, 2021 Community Development Committee minutes for your review. Thank you.
Any comments or entertain a recommendation?
Sollie?
Yep. Ken?
One of the recommendations I would make in general is that maybe for these committee meetings, we take roll call, because sometimes when I'm reading the minutes, you go back and you don't remember who was in attendance. And it would be helpful, I think, at the beginning of these committee meetings to actually have a roll call of our council members.
Okay, what about if perhaps we just identify who's missing? Would that work if someone's missing?
Yeah.
So yeah, Councilmember Thomas, just for the record, is not with us tonight.
Okay. I would go ahead and recommend that we accept the minutes as presented.
All right, any issue with that from anyone? Seeing none, looks like we're good on action item number 1. Action item number 2 is the continued discussion on the reconfiguration of Johnson Drive from Laura Smith.
Yes, thank you. So this evening we wanted to take the opportunity, separate from the consideration of the CARS program's submission for 2022 through 26, to just sort of wrap up our conversations around the potential reconfiguration of Johnson Drive between Lamar and Knoll Avenues. We know we've been talking about a variety of safety concerns, both for pedestrians and for drivers along that corridor since its reconfiguration in 2014. We've looked at and considered since that time period a number of alternatives, including implementation or addition of a stoplight back at the intersection of Woodson and Johnson Drive. But the council has continued to express concerns and at looking at some additional alternatives to address the issues that we had heard that particularly related to pedestrians being able to feel like they could safely cross and have traffic stop for them while they were in the crosswalks, backing out movements from the parking stalls, general speed throughout that corridor, and some potential sight lines as you're turning onto Johnson Drive from the various side streets. So as you know, at our March committee meeting, we presented the results of a survey that we conducted in February of this year. We had over 200 responses combined from kind of the user community as well as businesses, to just sort of test the assumptions that the public perception matched those things that the governing body and the staff have been talking about, and they did so. both through the survey and through a combination of 4 focus groups that were conducted in follow-up to that survey. We talked about those results, and at our March committee meeting, the council asked that as we advance this CARS presentation and put the packet together for our meeting this evening, that we look at including some case studies that could help support kind of reconfiguration or road diets in other communities. And so that information was included in your packets, along with a letter of support for the reconfiguration from the folks at Bike Walk KC, who we also spoke with in a meeting with our public works director and our on-call engineers, and both in their meeting and reiterated in their letter. Bike Walk KC believes that the reconfiguration is probably the most cost-effective option to address all of the concerns that we've heard over the last several years. So with that, be happy to answer any other questions, but would be looking for specific council direction on the reconfiguration as we prepare to submit the CARS project.
Thank you, Laura. Any comments or questions from anyone?
Well, I know for me personally, I'm excited to see this change move forward. You know, I live just a block off of Johnson Drive, basically, and we're down there quite a bit walking around. And this is really a move for pedestrian safety and kind of for the future of that corridor and what it's going to look like. So I think it's a really good move to make. I know not everyone's going to be excited about it, but hopefully it can be minimally disruptive during the actual reconfiguration work that needs to take place. And I think once that's done and everything's flowing through there, we're going to see some big changes for some of those businesses. I think it's going to really allow some of them to, or allow some other businesses maybe to look at moving in there, where we're going to have more foot traffic and more pedestrian friendly places to go. So anyway, I think it's good safety improvement and good all around for that whole corridor.
Yeah, Trent, did you have a comment as well?
Yeah, I was just going to echo Nick's comment. I'm excited to see us do this. I think we reached out to a wide variety of stakeholders and in good faith. And I know I participated in one of those calls with constituents just talking about this. The sense in town is people are excited. And I think we run the risk of, by not doing this, you know, potentially aggrieving some of those folks. So I'm really excited about, you know, moving this corridor into the future, and you know, all the evidence in our packet suggesting that it'll make it safer is really exciting to read through. And so I think this is a really cool leaf for us to turn over, and I'd be happy to support this.
And I did forget to mention that there was a conceptual, last month we also talked about just some visual for the conceptual look of that corridor. And that was included, that drawing was included along with the CARS action item. If there's anyone that would like us to pull that up now from the packet, we can certainly do that. Or did you all have the opportunity to kind of see that configuration? So when we talk about that 3-lane configuration, it is not a continuous third center turn lane the entire length of the block. It provides for those protected left turn lanes at the intersections, which means the lanes are wider, and it discourages, we hope, people from also making those turning movements into parking places across oncoming traffic. So,
and Laura, that was the preferred option of our traffic engineer as opposed to a continuous middle lane. Is that right?
Yes, that is the recommendation.
I have a question more than a comment. I am supportive of this concept. The question I have is whether this is going to address some of the backing out of diagonal parking issues that we have, or is there going to be any discussion of restriping the diagonals to back into the parking? I'm not sure that that's the safest way to do it, but I didn't know if there's any improvement of that situation with the 3 lanes.
I think the conversations that we've had with the engineers and the representatives from Bike Walk KC believe that this reconfiguration will help address that concern as well. So we have not talked about nor are we proposing back in parking along that corridor, but they do believe that the reconfiguration will assist with that visibility and that comfort level.
And do we know, going from 4 lanes down to 3, would that allow for a little buffer there between where the traffic lane actually is and when somebody's backing out? I mean, that's the biggest issue is you can't even back out a foot until you're sticking out into traffic on Johnson Drive right now. And if you got a truck or a van or anything parked next to you, you can forget about it. So, I mean, if you could allow someone to back out, 2 or 3 feet while they're not impeding traffic still, I think it's enough a lot of times to give a little visibility there and make that situation a lot easier to navigate and less dangerous for people.
So we talked to the traffic engineers about that. Like, can we move the outer lane line in closer? And because a lot of it is concrete to asphalt and there's a slope there, they thought that that would be kind of confusing to do that. A lot of those, I didn't realize it till I looked at the plans, but a lot of those are deeper than they need to be. It's just those shallow ones that are the concern in certain areas. So I think we talked as a group of, let's see how this restriping goes. And then, if we need to look at parking, we can. But during the design process, we'll kind of go over that again, but that wasn't their recommendation to do that in this concept plan.
I think part of it is naturally going to be addressed because you don't have 2 lanes, right? So you're going to have just a single lane of traffic in each direction. And so I think the tendency we hope will be for drivers to be, closer to that center line, which will provide some of that natural buffer, we think, as cars are backing out.
Is there going to be a bike lane also?
No. So the recommendation when you've got head-in parking like that is typically not to stripe a specific bike lane because you create potentially a hazard for your cyclists as they're traveling. It's very difficult for the cars that are backing out to see them.
Okay. It seems that the worst location is really in front of Max Hardware just because of the frequent backing out of there with regards to loading and unloading of merchandise.
And I would echo that it's the block where Brian's Bakery is. You take your life in your hand by going out that block. It's scary.
I'm with you on that one, Debbie. I mean, going into the coffee shop there, going into Brian's to grab something in the morning, it can be pretty sketchy sometimes trying to back out of there. You got to really be careful if you have any kind of car next to you because you can't see what's coming. And I think the only way we're really going to effectively slow any traffic down along Johnson Drive is to physically reconfigure it. We've lowered the speed limits and maybe that's helped a little bit, but the goal isn't to write a bunch of tickets down there. The goal is to provide a safe, walkable place and it's friendly to our business community. I think this is the right move. I wish we would have done this 3 years ago or whenever, 4 years ago now when the decision was made to put the stoplight back in instead. I think that's proven to not be effective to slow traffic down through that stretch and not address any of these problems like turning onto Johnson Drive from one of the side streets or backing out of a parking spot. But I'm glad we're taking the right step now to actually physically change it to try to slow some traffic down there. So I'm excited to see this. I hope it passes.
Yeah, I'm excited about this change too. And Debbie and I have been participating in the comprehensive plan steering committee, and the initial public feedback there is that, increased walkability, bikeability is a big priority of the community. And I think this might not help the bikeability piece, but should help the walkability piece and will be a good complement to, some of the work we've been doing around density with the Locale development and then the Mission Bowl development going in to make for a walkable corridor and that foot traffic that Nick was talking about for our local businesses.
And just to add, Sollie, if I can, that during the design process, we'll talk to the engineer about those specific locations to see if there's anything we can do at the parking. We talked to them initially, but for certain focused areas, we'll go over that again.
Yeah, if there's any way to add just a little bit of 2-3 feet of buffer space somehow to delineate that between where the parking starts or I guess where the lane ends, if you can allow people to pull out just a couple feet to start to see over their shoulder if there's a car next to them or a truck next to them, it makes a huge difference over there. But
Celia, I have another question. With regards to the plan from Lamar to Metcalf, when we do that in the future CARS program, is that also going to be configured the same way, or is it going to be a 4-lane highway there?
At this time, we're not really recommending a 3-lane just because that corridor is just a little bit different than the downtown area where the drives and the businesses are separated a little bit, and they're so there's a little more movement of traffic flow through that area than hopefully the downtown. I know that we'd like more pedestrian walkability, but not as much with all the entrances and the drives. So I think at this time, we were not recommending the 3-lane configuration.
All right, do we have any more questions, or I'd entertain a recommendation?
I recommend we take it to council.
Consent or non-consent?
Probably not on consent.
Non-consent. All right.
Yeah, thanks.
Great. Thank you, everybody. We'll move then to our third somewhat related item. So that is the 2022 to 2026 CARS program from Celia Duran.
Thank you. As you know, each year cities submit a 5-year road improvement plan to the county from which projects are selected for funding on CARS eligible routes, up to 50% for construction and inspection. And this project list is the same as last year's, with the addition of the 2026 project, which is the project that comes and goes, but it's the Johnson Drive, Metcalf to Lamar Avenue project. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to go over each project, but I'm definitely happy to answer any questions you have. But I did want to touch a little bit on the Johnson Drive, Metcalf to Lamar. I know that this has been a project of interest that needs to get done. It's an expensive project for us. There is going to be a call for projects for STP funding again, probably in June or July for the 2025-26 timeframe that we could apply for. The other thing that's going on is that Johnson County is doing their watershed studies, and they've identified preliminarily Rock Creek projects for flooding and water quality. So if that project is high on the list, we may be eligible to fund the interceptor, but the timing is going to be kind of close on how we can determine that. But hopefully, if we can get some funding for this project so that we have outside external funding to help us out. This is a project that's needed, and definitely the pavement's going to be done. So there's just some moving parts on that right now. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions or comments for Celia?
I have one comment.
Yes, Trent.
I was just going to say I appreciated seeing the Fox Ridge Phase 2 in there for 2023. I know that's going to be a big event for Ward 1 that a lot of people are looking forward to. So just wanted to express my gratitude for that.
And Celia, I shared this with Laura already too, but we are fortunate that our congressional representative, Representative Davids, is vice chair of that transportation committee, or sorry, sits on that transportation committee. And so I think, maybe talking to our staff about what the STP funding situation is looking like could be valuable as well. They might have some tips to be, a successful applicant.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is great. We'll go ahead and recommend that we move this forward. And I would say that this could be put on a consent agenda.
Any objections to that, anyone? All right. Take it forward. Thank you, Celia.
Thank you.
Next, we have Laura Smith and Penn Almoney presenting on the ratification of emergency expenditures for repairs at the MFAC.
So originally we had intended to have this on your agenda for approval at our April legislative meeting. When we originally talked with contractors about a repair or a crack repair for the outdoor aquatic facility, they had estimated about a 2-week time period for construction, which would have kept us on schedule to get the repairs made and get the pool filled and take care of all of the other items and issues that are associated with getting the pool open for the season. As we got further into that time frame continued to lengthen, and they were estimating at least a 4-week time frame. So I did authorize that emergency expenditure because I know our goal is to get the pool open for the 2021 swim season. And so as we authorize, it was slightly over my authority. So we are asking the council to consider ratifying that expenditure.
Sollie, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
I know that this, the pool has been refurbished very recently. Was any of that guaranteed in the work that was done prior with regards to the pool, or was it insured at all?
Well, it was, but it's actually been longer than it was reconstructed in 2014. So most of those maintenance bonds and guarantees have expired since that time. And this is just pretty typical. I know that it is an issue that Penn and his staff are continuing. I think we mentioned that in the action item. We'll continue to investigate. We think there's probably some groundwater situation under that pool that we may need to find a longer term solution for.
Thank you.
All right. Any other comments or questions on this one, or I'd take a recommendation?
I'd say move it and consent.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. Let's see, Penn's also got our next 2 action items, which are the lease and purchase of cardio fitness equipment and strength equipment for the community center.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. So most of the community center cardio equipment is replaced every 3 years. This allows the city to keep the most current and technically advanced equipment and helps minimize repair costs. It always also keeps it within the 3-year warranty window. The last significant purchase of cardio equipment was made in 2018. Staff solicited proposals from 4 vendors. After review, staff is recommending that the city acquire the cardio equipment from Advanced Exercise through a lease purchase agreement. And the 3 primary factors for choosing advanced exercises, we've purchased from them for the last several replacement cycles and have established a positive relationship with them. They also provide a guaranteed buyback of the equipment at the end of the lease term. So if we agree to purchase from them, they will agree to buy back that equipment prior to replacement. Advanced Exercise also holds the state contract for fitness equipment, meaning they essentially go through a competitive bid process, and they came out as the state contractor for that. And what our members and patrons love primarily is that Life Fitness is the cardio equipment line, as well as Hammer Strength, that they carry, which is considered the leader in professional grade fitness equipment. And so what's interesting about the lease purchase agreement is that we discuss internally every time this cycles through whether we should invest and just purchase the equipment outright. Obviously, a consideration is that we could keep it potentially past its warranty. And then the concern is, do we have staff on site, or is there a contract in place to keep the equipment up and running? We also wanted to conserve money for some of our park improvements. So the lease purchase kind of helps out in that regard. And we also, continually discuss this element, but we feel that Advanced Exercise is a great partner, and this really keeps us in a good place to have the most recent technically advanced equipment. So their Advanced Exercise is willing to decrease their cardio bid by $17,000 if we include and also include a credit of $5,191 toward the purchase of new strength equipment. So essentially, if we agree to renew our purchase with the cardio equipment and in addition purchase strength equipment, they'll reduce the overall cost by 17 grand and then kick in an additional $5,191 towards the buyback. So the discounted cost of equipment is $128,171. That includes a 3-year warranty, plus a $8,650 delivery and installation fee, brings the total acquisition of cardio equipment to $136,821.55. And like I'd mentioned, we discussed internally whether we purchase outright or whether we do the lease purchase program. We discussed with our financial advisors whether we do that through them, in partnership with them, or whether we go through the vendor. And after a financial analysis, we determined that the best decision for Mission is to partner with their financial institution, which is Kansas State Bank. And we can get the lease purchase financing at 2.99% over 3 years. That equates roughly to $551.39 each month, with a balloon payment of $15,726 coming due at the end. So feel it's the best interest of the city to move forward the lease purchase with advanced exercise in the amount of $136,821, and ask that we approve the resolution authorizing the mayor to execute the necessary documents to complete the lease purchase with Kansas State Bank. Any questions?
Penn, I have a question. What is the percentage that you actually sell when they do buy back of the original price? What do they actually pay for the buyback of the equipment?
So that buyback is roughly 20% of the original cost, give or take. It really kind of coincides with how much the technology has advanced during that 3-year cycle, and what the kind of secondary market will absorb in terms of how quickly they're offloading their used equipment. So we get a pretty decent buyback when that secondary market is doing well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Penn, could you touch on the 3-year cycle and why that's the cycle that makes sense? Is that what other facilities are doing? Is that tied to any repair rates, or why 3 years?
3 years is the industry warranty standard, so it really strongly coincides with that. It's pretty much an industry trend to for lack of a better term, warranty it bumper to bumper, everything all inclusive for that 3-year time period. Some of our competitors also switch equipment every 3 years because that seems to be a good time to turn over. There's so many advances in fitness equipment trends. You could potentially get new equipment every year and still be upgrading and improving. So we feel like 3 years is a good sweet spot.
And we have stretched that horizon in the past. We've tried a 3-year or 4-year and maybe even trying to stretch it to 5. And we did realize a very significant increase in the maintenance cost and the amount of time that the equipment was out of service for our patrons.
Great. Trent, did you have another question? Yep.
Yeah, Penn, was there any discussion with Advanced Fitness about us getting a little bit more of a credit on the buyback, considering that we had several months of severely reduced activity and not as much maintenance or not as much wear and tear on the equipment this time around as we would in a normal 3-year cycle?
While we didn't specifically speak to use patterns being dipped over that term, they were that $5,151 that they're kicking in was thrown in after discussions with them, trying to help the persuade us to purchase cardio and strength equipment around the same time this year.
All right, any other questions on the cardio side? Because we do have these as separate action items. So any questions on that?
One quick comment.
Yeah, Debbie.
Sollie, Hillary is not able to join us tonight. She's doing a family activity. And she did ask me to say that she had, although she's supportive of the equipment, she's wanting to ensure and wants to convey that she wants to see more money go into the parks versus all of it in the community center. So I'm just conveying her sentiment.
Thank you, Debbie.
I recommend that we move this forward, and I don't know, we could put it on consent.
Any issue with that from anyone? All right, and then we also, so the strength equipment was a separate item on our agenda. Do we have any further questions related to that piece, or Penn, did you have additional comments on the strength piece?
I'm certainly willing to go in more depth. If you're interested, I mean, the general takeaway is this is a great deal for us if we move forward and purchasing them at the same time. That $5,000 helps kick the total cost down to $81,326, and we had budgeted for strength equipment replacement in 2021 CIP. So this kind of aligns well with that.
Any questions for Penn on that side of things, or I'd entertain a recommendation?
Recommend that we take it the same way, consent.
All right, consent. Perfect, thank you, Penn.
Thank you.
And let's see, our final action item for CDC is the parking agreement with the Locale from Brian.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Kind of apropos to our discussion earlier this evening about Johnson Drive and parking. We have tonight on the agenda a parking agreement with EPC, who is the owner of the Locale multifamily housing development project that was recently completed on Johnson Drive. This is a 201 unit apartment complex, and next to it is a 4-level parking garage. That project was partially funded by tax increment financing provided by the city. And in negotiating that agreement with EPC, the city requested that the lower level of the parking garage, 50 spaces in the lower level of the parking garage, be dedicated to public parking. Much for kind of the reasons we were talking about earlier this evening. Sort of the long-term vision for Johnson Drive is a very active corridor with a lot of walkability, and obviously we're interested in attracting folks, not only our own residents, but folks from outside of our community to come and visit Johnson Drive, and they need a place to park. So the idea being just to park in that first level of the garage and enjoy your time in Johnson Drive. So before you tonight is a parking agreement that kind of solidifies that arrangement that we spoke to in the development agreement for the project. And we would ask for your approval of that.
Thank you, Brian. Any comments or questions on this one?
So this runs with the land, right? So if they sell the property, it remains a current easement.
That's correct. Once all parties sign it, we'll actually record it with Johnson County Recorder of Deeds, and that's right, it runs with the land. And if they ever sell the property, this would go with the sale. So there's some language in there in the contract that talks about assignability of that easement.
And they can use those 50 spaces overnight, is that correct?
Yes. For guest parking. So occasionally, right, you'll have a guest of a resident in the apartment building. They requested that we not restrict parking during the evening hours for those folks. And really our intent, if we decide to restrict parking, would be to about 4 hours. And that's primarily during the business day from about 8 in the morning to about 10 or so in the evening. And it's just to kind of help with that turnover. It also kind of helps to deter people that may want to park there all day. So you'll occasionally get those folks that I'll just park here for the day, and kind of deter some of that.
And that language is in the easement too, right, Brian? And we'd have the right to enforce that piece.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, any other questions for Brian, or I'd entertain a recommendation?
Recommend consent.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Brian.
Thank
you. That is the end of our action items. We do have a discussion item that is the renaming of Mohawk Park. Laura, can you and Penn give an update on this item?
Yes, thank you. Well, I think as everyone is familiar with, this year or last year, actually at this point, we undertook a conceptual redesign process for Mohawk Park. It's a process that we will go through and undertake in each one of our outdoor parks, or particularly the major parks. But it really gives us an opportunity to look at and plan for the amenities that we want to add in our outdoor park system. We've had many conversations and reflected in Councilmember Thomas's, I think, comments that she passed along through Councilmember Kring about, making sure that we make the investment in our outdoor park system a priority. Mohawk Park was first on the list as part of the park CIP over the last several years. So a steering committee was formed, and that is kind of the methodology that we intend to use as we look at this practice in all of our parks. Putting together a steering committee that includes ward council members. It includes PRT commission members. It includes various stakeholders depending on the primary current users of the parks, and then neighborhood residents as well, to really just give us the opportunity to build on the conversations that were started back in 2015 with the park, which went through a very robust public engagement process to identify various amenities that the citizens would like to see in our park. So now we're at that level of bringing those down and actually building them out conceptually and moving them to actual implementation, particularly in connection with renewal of our Parks and Recreation sales tax. So Mohawk was at the top of the list for that. And as a part of that, as you go through that conceptual redesign process and kind of refresh or a new look at the function of the park, it's the perfect opportunity to say, do we have an interest in a renaming of the park? And I think particularly in this situation, I think everyone's familiar that we haven't made a significant amount of investments in the park since it was acquired back in 2002 from the Shawnee Mission School District. So there was an elementary school, Mohawk Elementary School, on that site previously. And so that's really where our conversations began, was as we look at this conceptual redesign and moving this forward, do we want to consider, based on the amenities that have been identified through that process, to consider a new name for the park? And so in the past, when we've looked at park naming opportunities, we've created a chance for the public to provide input. We reached out via social media and through the Mission magazine earlier this year to create and generate ideas and thoughts. And those suggested names for the park were included in the PRT minutes that were included in your packet. I'll kind of let Penn pick it up here in a moment, but then the PRT considered those names. Really one of the top choices throughout the process was to leave the name of the park as it was, which is always certainly an option through this process. And that was something that we heard from some residents and through the public process as well. I have had the opportunity to reach out to the school district, who does not have really any information that they can share in terms of how the name for the elementary school was originally selected. They've encouraged us to potentially reach out to the Arts and Heritage Museum if we're interested in kind of continuing to make a part of that as we reintroduce a revamped and revitalized park in that area of our community. So before you tonight, you kind of have the information on the names that were submitted and the conversation that was had by the Parks, Recreation, and Tree Commission, trying to come up with names that, you know, recognize not only the historical significance of the site, but also the public input and the conversations that had been had to date. And so at this point, I think our recommendation, but it's certainly still a discussion item, which is why it was included as such on tonight's agenda, the opportunity for council input and direction. But the staff, I think at this point would say we would probably recommend retaining the name of Mohawk Park and continuing to work to build out that history as we reintroduce the park to the public. And I don't know if Penn has anything to add to that.
Yeah, the only thing I can add, Laura did a great job covering a lot of the details, is that our citizens love Mohawk Park and they've created a lot of memories there. Then some of them stem directly with the name and go all the way back to the elementary school days. But the largest takeaway I've gotten is that this is a treasured asset, and hopefully we can resolve this and get a consensus pretty quickly so that there's no confusion. I know PRT members were more than willing to share their insights and creativity, which was a great opportunity for them to engage in part of this redesign. And a lot of our residents just underscoring that they really do appreciate and like the name Mohawk, and it's kind of driven them to want to keep it.
And I guess I was kind of curious on the level of public input supporting Mohawk. I know as a council, we got one email in support of that name. So could you just kind of indicate what you heard, or, you know, how many people you heard from on that option versus, you know, something other than Mohawk?
Yeah, so the two most common requests that I got by email were Mohawk and Millhaven. And I received 5 emails for Mohawk, 4 for Millhaven. And then anecdotally, just speaking to people through the community center, probably another handful. So, I mean, in terms of total engagement, it wasn't overwhelming, but it was enough to say, okay, well, there's pretty good support for keeping the name Mohawk. And then obviously that letter we shared as part of the packet speaks volumes, and there were a lot of elements in that email that were kind of echoed throughout each of the sentiments that I was speaking with residents about.
Are there any liaison members from the board or the park commission that witnessed some of those discussions?
I'm here, but I was not able to make the last PRT meeting, so I wasn't a part of those conversations. I think Hillary was there, if I remember correctly, that night, but she's not here tonight. So I don't think either of the liaisons from that committee are going to be able to speak directly to any of that tonight.
Penn, I really like the idea of the Meadowlark Plaza as an alternative for using that name and within the park. So I guess I would be supportive of retaining Mohawk and then having the Meadowlark Plaza as as honoring the selection of that name as well.
We do have one comment in the chat from Andy, who is also on the call, Andy Sandler, who said, count me in favor of renaming it Millhaven Park. The school has been gone for years and Mohawks don't seem to have ever settled west of New York State. I think Andy is referring to the Mohawk tribe there. Again, it sounds like we don't have the background to determine at this point if that is the origin of the name, but I think that is what Andy is referencing.
That grade school, I believe, was built in the mid-50s. And so that, when you talk about history, that park or that area has been named Mohawk for just about as long as the city has been incorporated. So that is a strong part of our history. I didn't see a suggestion that wowed me. So I guess I would be in favor of leaving it Mohawk, since that is historically many, many families have used that park and that elementary school. So I guess I would be in favor of keeping it.
This is Kristen. I'd be in favor of keeping it as Mohawk Park as well. Thank you.
Trent, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I like the Meadowlark Plaza idea too, and maybe keeping it the same as Mohawk. And I was going to say too, even if, you know, the name were to be changed, perhaps we could always put a little plaque or something in the park, you know, referencing the former school and whatnot. But the Meadowlark Plaza was kind of cool.
Yeah, I would just add, I think if we do decide that we want to keep it, I'd like to do at least some more digging on that historical piece and perhaps recognition. My understanding from talking to some of the folks involved with the school district conversations was that some of the tribes that they spoke to distinguished between, you know, tribal mascots or, you know, buildings that were named after tribes. And they felt that those were different, and one was problematic and one was not. But I think it still would be interesting, you know, to consult with the Mohawk people. You know, they have a website, they have contact information available, and just see, you know, maybe we could get their input if they do have any concern, or, you know, to put a plaque with that history, you know, tying it back to the school and, you know, the history of the name there as well.
We can certainly do that. We can reach out in a variety of different directions and bring that back. I know the school district did confirm that they did not have any plans to change any school names. I know they've recently adopted a name change policy for mascots, but they did not have, their communications folks have indicated they did not have any plans. And I know they have several other schools throughout the district that are named similarly.
Yeah, and my understanding is they did do that consultation piece, so I think that would just be worth, you know, looking into, and if we can put something about the history there, that could be meaningful as well.
Absolutely.
Do we have any history on the naming of Millhaven?
We had various PRT members who had pieces of the history tied into a name, landowners, and it starts getting, you know, split off from there on what's accurate and what's not accurate, and none of them seem to be consistent. Yeah, Andy mentions that Millhaven name has its root in the Miller farm. That seems to be the only consensus that we've gathered consistently, and then it kind of splits from there on what happened.
Thank you.
All right, any more discussion on this one?
I would support leaving it Mohawk as well.
I would too. And if we were thinking about renaming anything, maybe we could look into partnering with some of our historian meetings with Frank Bruce and maybe make a list. But for right now, I think that retaining it would be great.
Great, thank you, Laura and Penn. And let's see, I think that's the end of our discussion items. So our last item remaining for CDC is Laura, if there are any department updates.
I know Penn has a quick one, Celia, and then I have one just last calendaring item before we move on to F&A.
We hosted Bunny Extravaganza and You've Been Egged last week. And I know Councilmember Flora and Councilmember Tom were there and showed their support, brought the littles. It was great to see our citizens out, huge smiles on their face, socially distant, all the precautions in place. And then the best element was just the truckload of eggs that each child got to take with them. And they were beaming. Some of them couldn't even carry them all, asking mom and dad for help. So it was great. I appreciate your support in allowing us to host an event in consideration of all of the factors. It was great for Mission.
Celia?
Just wanted to let you know that if you haven't been by the Rock Creek project lately, you should swing by. They've got the erosion mat and the seating done on the hill. And if we didn't have the rain, we'd have the parking lot done, but they're hoping to get that done on Friday or Monday, and then just regrading our city lot. And then we're finished with that project. So it's really exciting. It looks really good. The other thing is that we just put the 2021 street preservation projects out to bid today. So we're hoping to get good prices, and we'll be bringing that back to you in May. And that's all I have.
So yeah, I did have one question on that lot that I got from someone on that street. Do we know at the end of things, will the city sell it, or is that up for, you know, discussion, or what happens to the lot of the house that got knocked down?
So if I were recommending, I would say to keep it because it provides us access to that part of the project. But I know that there's been a lot of interest in, you know, people that want to purchase it. So I don't know if that's really a decision that's been made.
Okay. And then Penn, I did actually have one other question for you too. Have we heard any more on our Mohawk grant since we've been talking about Mohawk?
Yes, finally. Thank you for asking. The land water conservation grant that we had applied for, the committee has actually opened up the applications and is reviewing them. So we should have an update in the next few weeks on whether or not we got awarded. But it's nice to see that they actually opened the envelopes now.
Great news.
Great news. Great news.
All right. Well, with that, it is now. Oh, yeah, Laura?
Councilmember Flora, just one thing. I just wanted to let everyone know we've been looking at a good opportunity to have a presentation on the climate action plan. And I know the Sustainability Commission had talked about it recently, but we are planning for a joint work session and presentation by Mark staff on the 28th of April, which would be our typical work session Wednesday evening on that climate action plan. So we've included and will extend invitations not only to the council, but to the Planning Commission, Sustainability, and Parks, Recreation, and Tree Commission. I know we've talked a lot around many of the issues included in that and future initiatives. And so we felt it might be really valuable for us to all be able to hear the presentation together, and then that serve as a launch, kind of the launch pad for our continued discussions around that.
Great. Anything else? All right, with that, it is now 7:23 p.m. and with no further discussion, that concludes the meeting of the Community Development Committee. Again, this video will be made public on our newly revamped website at missionks.org.
Does anybody need a break before we move into finance and administration? Or are you ready to keep going? What, Ken?
It's fine. We can keep going. I just was going to take a brief break. But
no, let's take a 2-minute break, okay? We're on schedule tonight for once, so we're 2 minutes and we'll be right back here.
Okay.
Hey, Penn.
Yes.
Are you still on?
I am.
Hey, I went by Broadmoor Park on Thursday night, and there were a jillion people there using that new soccer net.
Yes.
That was nice to see. I was really happy.
It's pretty great, huh?
Yeah, so I just wanted to let you know how pleased I was with that, and just it looked like a lot of folks there, and it was cool.
Yeah, we got a new set of soccer goals, and we're definitely putting them to use. So. And I don't know if you noticed, but I trained Taylor, our parks technician, on dragging the baseball field. So the baseball.
Well, I did. I saw it looked like a couple of girls' teams were using the baseball field as well.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
like I said, I thought, my goodness, this park is rocking tonight.
Yeah, People are definitely getting their money's worth this season.
So I just wanted to mention that. It looked great.
Thank you. No one was climbing on them, right? They were just
no,
shooting.
No.
Okay. Good.
I was kind of worried. I thought, well, these have wheels on them. I hope nobody steals.
Yeah. It makes it easy just to put them on a street and start riding them home, huh?
Are we ready to return? Everybody ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Let's move forward to the Finance and Administration Committee agenda. It is now 7:29 p.m. and I'd like to call the meeting of the Finance and Administration Committee to order. Again, in consideration of the COVID-19 social distancing recommendations, this meeting will be held virtually via Zoom. The public is invited to participate and will be allowed to make comments through the online chat feature. Please note that comments are visible to the entire group. If you wish to make a public comment, please state your name and city of residence for the record and be conscientious of others trying to speak. This meeting will be recorded and posted on the city's website at missionks.org. Please contact the administration offices at 913-676-8350 with any additional questions or concerns. Next is public presentations, and we don't have any this evening. So we'll move into our action items. And the first action item is the acceptance of the Finance and Administration Committee minutes from Audrey McClanahan.
Thank you. Yes, presented here are the March 3rd Finance and Administration Committee minutes for your review and consideration, please.
Any comments or questions on the minutes?
Yes. Audrey, I just wanted to say thank you for making the amendments to the minutes as I had requested. I appreciate it.
Oh, sure. Thank you for sending us that.
Sure enough. So I would go ahead and recommend that we move that to consent.
Any concerns or comments? Okay, and in concert with what Ken mentioned at the beginning of our CDC meeting, I will state for the record that Councilmember Thomas is the only council member missing this evening, I believe. Okay, let's move to our next action item, and that is the annual resolution designating city-sponsored festival events, and that would be Emily Randall.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We every year have to, in order to have alcohol served in any of our public spaces or parks, we need to designate those specific dates that are affiliated with special events. So the resolution you have in front of you lists out the Mission Market dates for 2021, Thursday evenings, June through August. The time listed is 4:30 to 9. That's just a little bit of a buffer. Our market hours are 4:30 to 8 p.m., but we want to be cautious and round up. So we'll give clearance until that 9 o'clock hour. And welcome vendors who do have a drinking establishment license to serve during the market this year.
Great. Any comments for Emily on the city-sponsored events?
Looking forward to the market returning to normal.
Desperately.
And we might be bringing, as we, our event planning for the remainder of the year is ongoing, obviously, in response and reaction to the COVID situation. So typically we try to wrap this all up in one resolution, but you may see us bring forward some additional recommendations as things continue to kind of open up for us.
Okay, would anybody recommend taking this to council?
Yes, to consent.
Great. Okay, our third action item is updates to the commercial motor vehicle ordinance, and that would be Captain Kirk Lane.
Thank you, Chair. So you saw the action item that we have there. The two big points I just want to bring up real quick is the safety and preservation of our roadway and infrastructure. So that's the big reason why the push was. We knew we were going to have construction, so we sent Officer Kanan back last March to a 2-week certification school for this. And the three key points I really want to just kind of touch on real quick and not take a lot of your time. We currently don't have a mechanism to enforce commercial motor vehicle regulations. This will give us that. We want to protect the quality of our current roads as well as future investments into our street improvements. And finally, Officer Kanan's already certified, and this is an additional duty to him being as a traffic officer. Any questions you guys have over that at all?
No, it was great.
Pretty wild how many violations there are. The information in the packet on that. Glad to.
Yeah, just in the short time, you can see in there that, you know, he's already, I think there was 22 vehicles that were taken out of service just in the short time that he's been doing this. So it is a nice thing to have at our disposal to keep our citizens safe and our roads preserved moving forward as well.
I have a question. When you have a large delivery of construction, like for instance over at the Gateway, and they have to bring in large rigs or whatever, do they require some sort of special permit to come and deliver to those locations?
I don't believe there's any special permit, but the requirements of their vehicle to carry whatever equipment that they're carrying or delivery items that they're delivering have to meet the specifications of the vehicle that they're driving. And that's where, and it has to be safely done. So that's where the inspections would come in to inspect the vehicles and make sure they're not overloaded and things like to that nature. Does that answer?
Thank you.
If I could add to that, we asked for a truck route. So when we have a large development project like that, we ask the contractor to provide a truck route showing where that truck is coming into town, how it's leaving town.
Great. Thank you, Kirk.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And I would just like to thank Officer Kanan, whose face we can't see, but appreciate his interest and willingness to take on that additional training. And there he is, training and expertise, and be able to offer this benefit for the traveling public and the condition of our roads. So we appreciate that.
Does anyone want to make a recommendation to send this to council?
Yes, recommend consent.
Okay, any comments? Thanks very much, police. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next, number 4, next is the agreement for enforcement of the county health order, and that would be Laura Smith.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Kring. You will recall that back in December, we entered into an agreement with Johnson County to allow their code enforcement officers to enforce the provisions of the public health order that they adopted in November of 2020 within the city limits of the city of Mission, Kansas. That agreement was very specifically and very narrowly crafted to apply only to that specific public health order. Recently, the county has adopted a new health order that extends some of the provisions beyond that original expiration date, which was December 31st. And they issued a new order on March 26th of 2021. And so because the agreement was so specific, if we want to continue to allow the county to have the ability for enforcement within our city limits, we need to amend that agreement. And the agreement did allow for really whatever method each governing body might choose to amend that or extend that. And so we have prepared a resolution for council's consideration that would basically extend that order through the end of April 2021.
Anybody have comments or questions? Or anyone want to make a recommendation to take this to council?
Well, I just had one thing on this. I guess maybe it's not directly related to this, but can you remind me where we're at now with masks at the community center? Are we still requiring people to wear a mask while working out?
Oh, working out.
And is there any way that we could look at changing that as a part of approving this new resolution, or? I've had a number of residents reach out with concerns about that. A couple people have said that they're not coming back to the community center until they can work out without a mask. I don't know, Penn, if you have any input on maybe what you've heard or seen there, but I know that it's been a point of contention for multiple people that have contacted me. And I think we want to encourage people to get healthy and stay healthy. And if it's preventing people from working out, I think that's a lot more detrimental than the risk of maybe being in a 25% capacity gym with having to have a mask on when you're running on the treadmill or something. So.
Yeah, I have had conversations with members who have also requested the same thing, that we allow them to work out without masks. Our attendance kind of kept trending up throughout the month of February and March, and we've kind of tabled at this point. And so at least two of the patrons referenced that that's the reason behind it. So I appreciate that feedback.
I would recommend that we continue to maintain the policy until such time that the county lifts it. And I would recommend that we go ahead and move forward with the current resolution.
Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I just was gonna say, I recommend we separate the community center issue as its own agenda, just given the amount of discussion.
Fair enough.
We didn't do it last time.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, Flora or Debbie, I did just have one question. Sure, like the prior resolution, right? This is narrowly tailored to the new health order. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
I'd recommend we take it to council consent.
I would like this on non-consent.
Yeah, I think if we have a concern raised, we need to address the concerns. I would agree with that. We not on consent. And Nick, your comment is noted, and it will be brought up at council if that's what you choose.
Sure. I know the mask thing is not specifically a part of this. I just wanted to, I guess, get an update on where we're at with that, and maybe we can offline talk about what the process would be to consider getting that changed, or see what that might take.
Okay. All right. Any other comments on this issue? Okay. So we've had a recommendation to take it to council, and it'll be on non-consent because we've had a concern addressed. Okay, let's move to the fifth action item, and that is our last one, and it's on the Direction Finder survey, and that would be Laura Smith, please.
Yes, thank you. So Monday I had the opportunity to send out, we've been working on an update to the Direction Finder survey, which we hope to be able to get out into the community in the next 30 days or so, so that we can use it both in connection with our conversations surrounding the update to the comprehensive plan, as well as our budget discussions for 2022 and beyond. So last year I had circulated the survey document and the survey questions from the 2015 Direction Finder survey, both to the council and to the members of the leadership team, and asked for input and ideas about potential areas where we might be able to eliminate questions or look at revising some questions. In our conversations with ETC, we understand that the Direction Finder, from their perspective, this Direction Finder survey is limited to a total of 7 pages. So our goal will be ultimately to bring our questions within those parameters. And so I got really great feedback from both members of the council and the leadership team. In some cases, in direct conflict with one another in terms of preferences for questions. So it was an interesting exercise to try to sort through and wade through some of those kinds of things. So what I would recommend this evening, because I think we could spend a tremendous amount of time on that, but I think I have maybe a suggestion that might help us move through it a little more quickly and efficiently. And that is, I'd like to just sort of recap at a higher level some of the things that we kept in and eliminated and why. And I want to then also highlight some of the specific questions that have been discussed and vetted and suggested by the members of the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee at a meeting last month. And then I think that perhaps if there's a subset or if there are some on the council who might be interested in working with staff to do some additional wordsmithing next week, we could certainly, based on some of the comments and direction given this evening, handle that and get that kind of maybe a little further down the road final product out in advance of our legislative meeting later this month. I think that might be, because knowing our group, we could spend a lot of time wordsmithing. So what I'd love to do is kind of hit those highlights, then talk about if there's anything that you feel is missing from the survey that we've talked about over the course of the last 12 or 18 months, and or what kind of priorities that we want to make sure that we're asking about. And then we'll do kind of that legwork in the next week. So this afternoon, I also sent out, in talking with Councilmember Davis yesterday, I resent the 2015 survey, so you could have the opportunity to kind of do a side-by-side comparison if you were interested in that. I think it's important to remember that we have to preserve a large part of this Direction Finder survey because it gives us important information, both historically from our own sort of track record over the period of time in which we administer it, and we can kind of track our own progress in these various program and service delivery areas. But it also provides a really important benchmarking tool, I think, both regionally and nationally, so that we can kind of start to see and understand trends and where we are similar and perhaps where we may be different than some of the other communities. So a lot of the body of the survey you'll see is somewhat consistent with the 2015 survey. So we started out really just asking questions about overall perception of the city, including quality of our services, value received for tax dollars and fees, image, quality of life, condition of housing. Just that first, let's jump off into this, get people to tell us across the spectrum how they feel. And then we really looked at each of the more specific service delivery areas by department or by function, starting with public safety. We added some questions about visibility in both neighborhoods and commercial areas, and police relationships with the community. You'll see throughout the survey, both in previous surveys and in this document, we'll often survey in that general category. And then there will be a follow-up question that asks the respondent to identify generally three items from the question above that they think should receive the most emphasis. And so that really helps us, particularly in our budget conversations, to be able to take that information and translate that into additional services or modifications to programs and services. So sometimes when that might feel somewhat redundant, it actually is an additional layer of data that helps us see that priority from the resident's perspective. So then we also talk about just a general perception of safety in various places throughout the community. Then we kind of move into a parks and recreation category where we're looking at the maintenance of the parks, the number of parks or the amount of green space generally, walking and biking trails, condition of amenities, ease of registration for programs, fees for memberships, programs, and facility rentals. Then you see that same prioritization question. And then we asked a question here that was an ad just looking at amenities that people would like to see included in Mission Outdoor Park. We've collected a lot of information around priorities for specific amenities, both through the Parks Master Plan, through some of our additional public conversations since then. But what we haven't done is collect that information in a statistically valid fashion. And so we wanted to take the opportunity to add some of those amenities back and collect that data through the Direction Finders process. Then we kind of started moving into, and we're seeing this as a trend in many of the Direction Finder surveys, and we did review surveys from other communities, both here in the metropolitan area and a couple really from across the country, but getting it more at some of those community values. So what types of things are more relevant or less relevant to individuals and their families. And you'll kind of see, you know, attractive, healthy, well-maintained, economic growth and vitality, environmentally sustainable, those kinds of things. Then we move again then into a more specific program or service delivery section related to code enforcement and the enforcement of debris, mowing of weeds, exterior maintenance of both residential and commercial properties, interior life, health, safety maintenance, particularly for our rental properties, and then sign code regulations. And then we just ask a general question about the overall feeling about the level of code enforcement in the community. Is it kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, too much, too little, or just right? Then we move into a city maintenance kind of section, and really that relates to most of our public works items, or many of our public works items, along with general condition of our city buildings and facilities, snow removal. We asked questions here about the condition of streets, and we broke that down because one of the things I think you'll know we've talked about in putting our street program together is kind of trying to segment people's perceptions and thoughts around both the major thoroughfares and their own residential streets. But we also, you'll see, we broke out here the condition of curbs, and probably we need to add curbs, gutters, and sidewalks. We think internally that oftentimes a resident's perception that the street is bad relates to the condition of the curb. And so we want to be able to sort of test that and evaluate that as a part of this process. And then you'll also see that we added a question here in this section that talks about the quality and timeliness of street maintenance and construction. So trying to get at how people think we're doing in terms of moving through that as quickly as they might like to see. This is an area where in previous surveys, when we look at that, then 3 areas that require emphasis, this is where streets have risen to the top. And this is kind of the question that has driven or supported the investment in the continued prioritization of the streets. 13, we added a question, excuse me, that relates to leadership. This is something, again, that we noted as we were reviewing other Direction Finder surveys that kind of talks about quality of leadership provided by elected officials and staff, the accessibility of city leaders and responsiveness, the level of public involvement in local decision-making, and then the job that we do at sort of welcoming and encouraging that development. One of the things that I will note specifically is if you look at the 2015 survey, there is a section specifically related to customer service and the quality of customer service that someone may have received. We took that section out of this current version of the Direction Finder. And we had a lot of conversation internally around that. But when we look at the number of respondents, so historically about 70% of the people who respond to the Direction Finder survey have had no interaction with city staff or the city organization. And so they don't have any comments to make specifically about the customer service experience. So we've added some things. In that overall perception, there's a question about quality of customer service from city employees. This leadership question, I think, begins to get to some of the issues of customer service responsiveness. But what we really feel like is the best place to survey customer satisfaction is after someone has had that specific interaction with us. So we're talking about developing some surveys and opportunities to follow up and get and collect that data, because it is valuable and it is important. But so, for example, when you come in and go through a building permitting process with us, or participate in a class or a program at the community center, or you know, potentially even follow up with residents along a street that's been, you know, resurfaced, or somebody who's experienced stormwater project or repair. So looking at those, and we'll be bringing that information forward and talking with you about how we're going to incorporate that. So if you notice as you look through this that customer service section disappeared, it's not because we don't think it's important to measure. It's just that it was taking up space, and we felt like in this survey instrument, it wasn't very effective in returning good information to us. And then we talked really about communication, the city's efforts to keep people informed, in experience engaging with the process, ease of locating information on the city's website. And then we talked about and asked where people get their the primary sources of information about city issues, services, and events. We hope that the website will, after this redesign, will potentially rise up a little higher. And I think in the last time we did the survey in 2015, we certainly, if we even had any social media, we certainly weren't as active as we were through the social media outlets. So it'll be interesting to kind of collect that information. The next question kind of moved into some of the sustainability options. And I will tell you, this is a question that I swiped specifically from another communities, but I know we talk a lot about if we're going to offer programs, or how do we engage residents more in some of these sustainability options and programs. We included some of the things that we've talked about over time. I thought that there was perhaps some value in adding this as well. I believe it was in the City of Roland Park's recent Direction Finder survey that they asked a very similar question. And so my thought was not only for our own benefit, but potentially looking at partnership opportunities with our surrounding communities to gauge interest and participation in some of these programs might be valuable. Then we move into a section that just asks residents to indicate the factors that were important to them in making a decision to live in Mission. And you'll see, again, there are some things that are within our control in this document, and some things that are not within our control, like necessarily the quality of public schools, location within the metropolitan area. But we certainly know through conversations in other venues that those are things that make Mission, that we should capitalize on and supplement with the things that are within our control. And then again, we ask them to prioritize the 3 items that would have the most impact in their decision to stay in Mission over the next 10 years. Then we ask some questions about transportation, and this is really trying to get at some of those things about how do residents feel about the addition of sidewalks. We've had some conversation around that in our street program. I think our conversations as a council and staff have been a focus on, let's get the sidewalks that we have brought up to an appropriate condition before we start taking on a significant amount of new sidewalks. But this gives us an opportunity to just gauge general thoughts and feelings about neighborhood sidewalks, looking at coordinating with area agencies to increase transit options, a continued investment in pedestrian-friendly improvements and commercial developments, extension and expansion of our trail network, and then making bike lanes a priority in all our transportation planning. Then we ask just generally what the 3 most significant issues they think the city would face over the next 5 years. Kind of helps us have a little bit longer term lens in terms of where we might want to focus resources and priorities to address those. And then we asked a question about indicating a level of agreement with the willingness to support an increased investment. So additional taxes or fees to address both current and future unmet needs. And this is a question very similar to a question that we used in 2015 that helped us shape some of the decisions around street financing and street funding. So this may be a particular question where we certainly want to look at, evaluate, maybe there may be some things missing here that the council would like to, you know, gather some data or ask about. Because then we ask which one would they most support, and then we go on to ask the question of how much more on a monthly basis would they be willing to invest. And we didn't go higher than $20 a month. There's certainly opportunity to go higher than that. Those were kind of the levels that we surveyed on the 2015 survey. And I can tell you based on that survey, the most selected or the highest priority was that $6 to $10 a month. And that's, again, what sort of drove the decision around that conversion of the 7 mills to fund the street program. Then one of the things we've talked about is housing and housing affordability. So again, this is a question about how do we feel the housing options that are currently available match someone's price range. Again, this is a question that many of our neighbors are surveying on. So it gives us, I know there will be opportunities for us to compare not only what our residents are saying, but we will have some good regional comparisons as well. And then this question 23 is a question that I know was discussed by the Comp Plan Steering Committee, and that was looking at level of support for actions that the city could take to address a variety of different housing priorities. So encouraging the development of new apartments and condominiums, a focus on just preserving what we have in both property maintenance and our neighborhoods overall, infill residential development, mix of housing to attract people at various life stages, regulation of tear down and rebuilds, senior housing options, and maintaining affordable housing stock. Then some questions. I know we've had a lot of conversation in the last couple of years as we've watched some of our neighbors struggle with these issues, but how supportive are residents of increased authority of the city to regulate design elements in new or significantly remodeled homes? And then looking at ranking in order of importance, the specific design elements. And this again is a question that I believe was asked in a Roland Park Direction Finder survey. It may not be important to us in terms of that level of detail. We may feel it's enough to just have the information collected in 24. So that's one I might highlight or circle and say, you know, how do we feel about that? Then there's a question that kind of touches on some of the additional sustainability pieces related to green building codes, energy efficiency, green stormwater infrastructure. Then a question really just about 3 actions that would help improve the overall quality of life in Mission. Then some questions about just general agreement with things that the city should take on as priorities. So some of these, like the first one, the wayfinding signage, maybe one that excuse me, we want to remove because we're already moving forward with the wayfinding project to a certain extent. But, you know, a variety of things, continued improvement of parks and recreation amenities, incentivizing development, which incorporates mixed use, pedestrian amenities, et cetera. And again, some of these questions feel a little bit redundant. And that the ETC representative couldn't be here with us tonight, but I'm going to ask it to see if they can be available at our legislative meeting when we kind of do the final consideration, because I think they can share some additional perspective on why sometimes it's important to build in some level of redundancy when putting these questions together, because you want to be able to sort of test a question or support a question that asked in a variety of different ways. bicycle facilities. Again, this could be a question area where we take away from or add some things if the council doesn't feel like we've asked all the right questions. Then 30, again, 3 most important objectives used to guide future growth and development in mission, I know was another question specifically that was discussed by the comp plan steering committee. And then a variety of demographic questions. And we may not have the demographic questions exactly how we want them either, but that's important just to allow for some distinctions and differentiations based on just certain circumstances. So I'll stop there.
Laura.
And see where we want to kind of go back if there were any specific reactions, responses, thoughts, comments that we want to dive into this evening.
Laura, can I ask a question? What's the sampling methodology for the ETC survey? How many are actually surveyed? What kind of response rate are they looking for? And is there any way to pin the responses to wards of the city or whether they're apartment owners or not?
So that was one of the demographic questions is, and we could certainly build it out a little bit more. One of the demographic questions asks about, do you own or rent? And in the 2015 survey, I believe we actually asked if you indicated that you were a renter, we asked whether that was in a multifamily or a single family property or home. So that's certainly something that we could do there. And yes, they are able to pin the responses to a map. So if you look at the final report from 2015 or any of the previous surveys, they will be able to tell you by question. You'll be able to see sort of where throughout the city the responses were, which is really, I mean, it's really helpful and very interesting to kind of see. I would say that at least in 2015, the responses were pretty specific or similar, similar from kind of ward to ward. There were some natural breaks where you saw some things that you might anticipate, but there absolutely, that's an important component of this. And again, I'll ask ETC when they're here, but they do guarantee that we receive at least 400 surveys. I can't remember the number that they mail out. I believe it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,800 to 2,000 surveys that are mailed randomly. And then they will, if they do not receive back via online or through the mail, the number that they've guaranteed for us to reach that level of statistical, validity or significance, then they will actually do phone follow-ups to make sure that they collect that data.
Laura, go ahead, Ken, go ahead.
I did send you an email this afternoon. I don't know if you received it, and I'll be glad to be a participant on your rewrite if you need to. I won't go into each of the items that I've sent to you, but I thought, there's some ideas there that might help shorten the survey. So anyway, I think the survey is well done. Thank you.
Laura, one quick comment, number 37, which is best describes your race. Caucasian's not listed, so I wouldn't be able to put a category on there.
Okay. Probably an oversight on my part. The other thing that the folks at Direction Finder will do is once we land on generally the questions, they require about a 2-week period to review and format the survey. So they are the survey experts, and they're going to point out or tweak any questions that we may have asked incorrectly. That's why we tried to rely on other survey instruments that they'd used for the construction of the questions, so that we could reduce the need for them to do necessarily that kind of review. But they may also have some very specific suggestions about order of questions and flow of the questions throughout the survey document.
So if we're still receiving, you know, edits or rewrites from the council who've offered, I think Sollie and Ken both did, are we still recommending taking this to council on the 21st or not?
I would think so. I mean, I think if we're, you know, if we're close, if there's anything, what I'd really appreciate hearing this evening is if there's anything that you feel that is just a glaring omission at this point, please, you know, let's talk about that and where best to incorporate that. And then I think if we can do some wordsmithing, you know, we may need to spend a little bit more time at our legislative meeting than what we might typically, to just do a final review of the questions. But I do feel that it's reasonable. If we don't get there, then we just push off by a couple of weeks, and we're still, you know, within the timeframes and parameters to get it done to support both the comp plan process and our budget. So if we need to push a little further, we can absolutely do that.
Okay, so go ahead, Trent.
Thanks, Celia. I had just two quick comments, Laura. Number one, this is really minor, but I saw we have 2 number 12s and 2 number 13s in the survey. And then the second piece was, does it make sense at all? And I apologize for not bringing this up earlier when we were kind of first starting this off, but I almost think it would be helpful to have a question in the leadership section. Just, do you know who your elected officials are? Just a simple, you know, identification of sorts, just to even know kind of if that's breaking through. You know, maybe others disagree, but that's just kind of my only content suggestion. Otherwise, I think this is a pretty wide spanning survey that I'll be excited to see the results for.
I had a few things too, and I agree with Trent. I really do like that idea, even if we just kept it simple and asked that question. But in 2015, when we chose ETC, I remember them giving us a presentation or just like a high-level summary about their internal processes. Do we still have that? Just as a refresher, I think this is great and I'm good with it, but it would just be nice to see a refresher of their processes and anything that might have changed since.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, I'd hoped that they could be available this evening, and they weren't, but I think we can ask them to give that presentation at the legislative meeting. I think would be helpful. And quite honestly, that's probably an opportunity where we'll, you know, have more public that might be tuned in to kind of see and hear that as well.
Hey, Laura, when you say you got feedback and you need to do wordsmithing, are we talking minor wordsmithing? Are we talking major wordsmithing? One of the values of this tool is keeping the questions the same so that you can compare survey over survey to see which way you're trending. If you change a lot of the questions, or if you change how they're worded, you're destroying that ability to see that trending. So what are we talking about when we're talking about wordsmithing?
I think it's relatively minor. I don't think it's major wordsmithing, and for really just that reason that you've identified. You know, obviously there are different, you know, not every city has a community center, or not every city is asking about their outdoor pool. And that's why I really have spent the time to try to build this already so that we're close to that consistency in the language that allows us the benchmarking capabilities. There just may be some additional things that, you know, that we want to add in terms of, and I think probably more related to specific programs or priorities, as opposed to changing the language of a lot of the questions.
And I think we also, and I agree with RC that I think it would be helpful for ETC to refresh us. They're the experts in doing this, and there's a certain amount of statistical validity and structural integrity on these surveys. And I want to make sure that we don't get off track and you know, damage either one of those, that this is a valuable product, and following their guidance on how you do that, because there's the science to this, and I want to make sure we're following that science.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and maybe the focus could be primarily on the new questions, especially since we will, repeat them again in the future, making sure, those questions are really right and not, messing with the ones that we need to compare against for previous years. That makes sense.
And will these questions, will you keep them in revision mode so that we can see which are changing for us? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Any other comments?
I did just have one question, and maybe this would be part of the ETC presentation, is I know like for newspaper articles and stuff, you talk about a 4th grade reading level, and we have questions in here that have words like impervious surfaces. And so I was just wondering if part of that ETC check is sort of a, common understanding level, with word choice and things like that, or if that's something we need to be worried about.
No, they can help us with that as well.
That's a good point, Sollie. Thanks.
I recommend that we move this to non-consent.
Great. Everybody okay?
Well, I would prefer, if we're going to have a presentation from ETC, I would prefer to leave it on the regular agenda if that's acceptable, so that if it's on consent, I'm afraid we would need to pull it off to then have the conversation.
No, non-consent is what it said.
He said non-consent.
Okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
Okay. Thank you, Laura. Okay, we're going to move into our discussion item mode, and we have 4 discussion items tonight. The first one is a revision to the smoking ordinance, and that would be Laura Smith. We have 4.
And what I might ask Councilmember Kring, if it would be all right with the committee, is if we could I think that we can move quickly through items 7 and 8. And sure. I suspect we'll spend a little bit more time on item 6. So if it would meet with the committee's acceptance, we could go ahead and get through 7 and 8 and then come back to item 6. Is that acceptable?
That's perfect. Can I get a thumbs up? Can we just move to item 7? Perfect. Okay. Item 7 would be selection of committee chair and vice chair. And Laura Smith, would you talk to us about the selection of those committee positions?
Absolutely. And this is included as a discussion item because according to our council policy, each June, we do a rotation or consider the rotation of committee chairs and vice chairs. And so there's really I don't believe a need to discuss this tonight. We just like to make sure that it's on your radar screen as you think about potentially where you might want to be involved or look at those council leadership roles. And then it would be placed directly as a new business item on our May 19th City Council agenda, so that the new committee chairs and vice chairs would be in place for our June committee meetings. And then along those lines, also by ordinance, every 2 years in odd numbered years, the council will elect a council president and vice president. And that occurs in April of those odd numbered years. And so obviously we are in an odd numbered year, and we are in the month of April. So you can expect to see on your legislative agenda later this month a new business item that will serve for the election of a new council president and vice president. So happy to answer any questions about the process, but just want to make sure that everyone is thinking about all of that in advance of when those will appear on your agendas.
I do have a question about that. Given that there are 2 seated council members that are running for the mayor's position and not re-upping for council, what has been the history in terms of nominating individuals that are potentially going to go off council in terms of serving in the vice chair or chair positions?
President or vice president, or chair or vice chair?
Well, I guess all 4 actually, but I'm thinking more of the committee chair and vice chair position.
I think realistically, we probably want to avoid it because one way or another, we're going to have to nominate somebody new in the fall then. If either of the current council members that are running for mayor took any of those spots. So.
Ron, is there a history that you're familiar with?
No, I'm not aware of any history on that matter.
I mean, there's obviously a mechanism to replace either committee chairs and or council president and vice president should there be a vacancy in the office. And without sitting down and mapping it out, over the last 16 years, I don't remember how each one of those opportunities has played out. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments or questions on the council and committee positions?
I just have a comment. I can only speak for myself, but I do not intend on going for either or any of those positions. I think I've set all of them, so I'm okay with that. However, whichever way it goes. So
I am also happy to not be nominated for anything. So if people want to go that way, I won't be offended.
Okay. Okay, let's look at our last discussion item, and that is the council committee liaisons that currently exist. Laura, could you give us a clarification on moving forward on that level?
Absolutely. So back in April of 2019, we adopted a council policy which established specific liaisons for our various boards and commissions. It did not include, because of their more quasi-judicial or quasi-administrative roles, we did not have council liaison positions to the Planning Commission or the BZA, but we did at the time to the Parks, Recreation, and Tree Commission, to the Sustainability Commission, and at that point in time, we had the Capital Improvement Commission, which has since been disbanded. The policy anticipated that the appointments would be for a 2-year period, with new liaisons being appointed in December of odd-numbered years. So again, we're a little in advance of that, but I know I've had some questions from council members about, the policy and when will we think about having an opportunity to sort of rotate or move liaisons. And I know that some on the council are not liaisons to any particular board or commission at this point because of, the Capital Improvement Commission going away or other things. So I wanted to just sort of get this out in front of us. Again, I don't know that we need to have a long discussion about it this evening, but I think that the policy does need to be revised at a minimum to reflect the new or the current status of our boards and commissions. And I don't know if there are other revisions that the council may want to see or consider as we do that. I know we also have our Mission Magazine editorial board, which had some council representation, not specifically assigned through this process, both the Mission Magazine editorial board as well as the Family Adoption Committee. And so I don't know whether it's prudent to include those. So anyway, just wanted to put this out there because I have had several questions about that, and just generally encourage you to, to maybe say, let's take a look at that. If you have specific feedback or thoughts around this policy, if you want to send those to me, we can certainly start to mock up revisions to the policy and bring that back as a discussion item at a future committee meeting, as well as if you have a particular interest in working with a specific board, commission, or group, that would certainly be a great opportunity to let us know that as well. And then again, we can bring this back, get the policy updated in advance of kind of our December timeframe, and then consider making new appointments as appropriate.
Comments? Go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, one of the things that I'd like to see is hear from the commissions and chairs of committees to see whether or not, what's the value that they see in having the liaison, number one. And number two, I think that the concept of possibly a liaison and an alternate might be another opportunity so that you don't have 2 liaisons assigned to each of the committees. So that may be one approach. I don't know if the role has changed in terms of the participation on the committees since I've not served in a liaison role these past couple of years. But it'd be helpful to get a sense from the committees themselves whether or not they have, what their perception is of the value.
And I agree, Ken, but let me just lend one thing to this. One of the instruments that we've used on sustainability, Sollie has a legal background and I have an environmental background. And both of those on a personal level, I think have been extremely beneficial to that commission in moving forward legally, what they can ask for, where they can weigh in, and on an environmental level, what our future looks like in sustainable business practices. So I think both of those have been extremely valuable, but I certainly agree that you should check with them and find out if they're okay with that.
Yeah, I agree with getting the feedback. I feel like we've been well received, but you never know.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else on that, Laura, or do you want to?
No, again, if you have other more specific thoughts or comments once you've had a chance to look at the policy again, please feel free to send those to me, and then we'll get it scheduled and sort of teed up for a future committee agenda.
Great. Okay, I think we're going to move into other, which are department updates. And Laura, do you have any department updates for finance and administration this evening?
I do. I think Brian had a quick update.
Well, before I forgot, we still need to go back to item 6.
And we'll go. Let's do our department updates, and then we'll go back to item number 6. So Brian, if you want to go ahead, and then I think Emily, you had something as well, correct?
Okay, my update is just that we had a successful rollout with Office 365. We launched it last Monday, and I think it's taken some getting used to for all of us, sort of getting acclimated to a new software, but it's been very successful. So thank you for that opportunity. And again, if any of you have questions about how to use it or applications or anything like that, feel free to reach out and we'll get the answers for you.
Brian, you would be able to tell us how to get all our old email information back in some reasonable form, right?
You should have your old email. Do you not have it?
I have it, but I mean, it's going to go away at some point, I would think. So do we need it down? Oh, I'll get with you. Never mind. I'll get. No,
all your old email that was in Google migrated over to Office 365, and it's not going away.
Okay. All right.
So you'll keep your old email now in Office.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And I just wanted to share just quickly about the website launch. Kept you apprised, I think, via email, but it was a big 1-2 punch with our Microsoft 365 rollout that was successful. And then we did the website switch over in the dead of night last week. And we did not run into any trouble in the transition and have had good feedback so far on the website. There's still obviously to-do items for edits and tweaks and things we want to, just adjust slightly. But in general, I think people have taken to it well so far. And I would just offer just a small presentation at the legislative meeting this month, just as a bit of an orientation. I think just for whomever's watching or to who sees the recording, as well as all of you, just to kind of drive through the site briefly to show some of the features and things that we hope will be really helpful so that everyone feels acclimated and comfortable with the new website. So I'll do that just quite quickly on the legislative agenda.
Thanks, Emily.
Thanks.
Anything else, Laura, on the department front? Okay, should we move to item 6? This is the continued discussion and conversation on smoking ordinances, and Laura will give us an update.
Yes, I think we're all familiar that last month, kind of in response to some questions that had been posed by Councilmember Schlossmacher last fall about what it would take in terms of ordinance revisions or considerations to accommodate smoking in a tobacco shop, in kind of what it would take to realign those ordinances. He'd had some conversations and inquiries specifically as it would relate to more of a cigar lounge type situation. And so we had done some initial research and shared that back with the council in advance of the conversation at the March committee meetings. At that time, Councilmember Stossmacher took the opportunity to kind of share some additional information and perspective regarding his request. And in addition, there was an opportunity for the council to hear from Mike Staus, the owner of La Cultura, in just providing some context regarding operations and considerations for the cigar lounge. The presentation that he had prepared, just as kind of general background information, was included in your packet this time. I know that Councilmember Davis shared some additional information from the American Lung Association and some information on some distance requirements and regulation of vape shops and some ordinances that the city of Shawnee had recently adopted and approved. Leaving the March committee meeting, it felt like there was at least consensus to continue to discuss and explore the topic. And so in order to do that, we felt like from a staff perspective, most efficiently, some of those changes have been drafted in terms of a form of an ordinance. Now, obviously this is a discussion item, so there's no action that's anticipated on it this evening, but felt as if that was perhaps a good way to start to outline the differences or the changes that would be required. The other thing that I did send out earlier this afternoon and happy to walk through was I took the information that we had collected from a variety of different cities here in Johnson County, specifically from their ordinances where exceptions to the no smoking ordinances had been made in each of those communities, and tried to put that in a table or matrix form. So hopefully that was an easy illustration of just some of the requirements that exist. And I included information for Overland Park, for Lenexa, for Leawood, for Olathe, and for the city of Prairie Village. And then in addition to that, in some of those cities' ordinances, there were some more specific definitions. And so I included those in the email to you all late this afternoon as well, just to kind of help continue to inform the conversation. So with that, really the revisions that would be required, and we talked about this last month, but the things that would be required would be a revision to, adopt an exception or exemption that is included in the Kansas Clean Air Act that would allow for smoking within a tobacco shop. Now, I know that the council or some on the council have expressed some concerns about opening that up and then opening up the possibilities for smoking in vape shops and other situations. So in an effort to try to address some of the concerns that we had heard, we looked at the provisions and some additional requirements on tobacco shops that would require them to be in standalone buildings, and then would impose some additional distance requirements from schools, hospitals, parks, residentially zoned districts, et cetera. And so that would be the way in which you would start to bring some of those things together if there was an interest in, making any exemptions to that. So I'll kind of stop there. Again, one of the things that if you saw or see on the matrix is that I believe it's the city of Lenexa also includes a specific prohibition on alcohol or cereal malt beverages in order for a business to qualify as a tobacco shop as well. So that's certainly another piece I know we talked about in March that could be evaluated as this discussion goes forward. So I will be happy to answer additional questions, but I'm confident there's a lot of discussion that the council is anxious to have around this.
Let me kind of begin by letting you know that I heard from Councilmember Thomas and what her take is and what she would like conveyed and shared this evening. She has some basic concerns about the smoking overall, but said she would be comfortable if several things played out. One of those would be if it was a membership only. So it would be viewed as a private club and you had to be a member to go into the building. Standalone, and the ordinance should specifically define no vape shops, and has a litany of other et ceteras, if you will, so that tobacco in the form of cigar would be the only thing recommended for pursuance of this ordinance.
Debbie, I had a similar comment along those lines. Yeah, I think if we were going to pursue it further, I'd want to look more at that definition of tobacco products. You know, it says specifically that it doesn't include cigarettes, and so I'd like to similarly maybe see vapor products defined and exclude, you know, the vapor products from that. Another piece I'd like to hear some more on would be the distance. So we have, you know, 200 feet in there, but I think the materials shared from, you know, the Lung Association had some further distance recommendations in terms of influence on youth and tobacco. And so, you know, I just like further consideration of what that setback is. Still agree that the standalone building, which is how it's drafted, is a really important piece of all this. And then I think rather than sort of defining it in the negative in terms of the age restriction, I would just want to make it clear that it's, you know, only allowed if you're 21 and older on the age piece.
Yeah, I think the 21 and older restriction is in place everywhere. I mean, that's a federal thing now, so I don't think there's even any question about that. I know as far as the alcohol thing too, with the way that the law is in the state of Kansas, I don't even know that a shop could, not that any of them that I've ever been to sell or serve any alcohol, but I don't know that they'd even be able to get away with it with the revenue requirements that are in place. Because I know that there's this, you know, as part of the state law, there's a mandate on how much of your revenue has to be done through sales of tobacco products. So realistically, for shops to even qualify for that, they can't really sell a whole lot else. And that's kind of the point of it. Totally on board with carving out anything, you know, specific about vapor products or, you know, e-cigarette products. I think that might be just my opinion, the way to really differentiate that as any electronic devices, or I don't know, maybe some people have some other feedback there. But.
Well, and I will just point out, because one of the things that I did note, the 65% of gross receipts in tobacco sales is a state statute, is included in the state statute. So obviously we can't be less restrictive than that. But I did note that in the city of Olathe, they also required an 80% of gross receipts requirement. You know, and so again, I think there are some options to look at there. That was one that I hadn't seen before. So I just wanted to kind of make note of that as well.
Sure, I think that's all reasonable.
Laura, do we know why the one city has 80% instead? And now I can't remember who it was.
It's Olathe.
It's Olathe. My guess is that it's an attempt to limit the number, right? So the higher the amount of gross sales, the probably, you know, fewer people that would be able, as Nick just mentioned, to hit that target and be able to meet that threshold.
That makes sense.
I want to thank staff. I want to thank staff for all the work you've done on this. You brought a lot forward and a lot for us to think about. I really appreciate staff's work on this. Go ahead,
Debbie.
Ken. Yeah.
Well, you know how I feel. I am opposed to opening this up. I don't think that it's good for the community. I think that, first of all, we tout ourselves as being a healthy environment and a community that wants to build walkable communities and healthy environment. And this is only opening up a situation where we are being unhealthy. Cigars basically are, if you smoke a cigar, you're smoking the equivalent of a pack of cigarettes. That's the amount of intake that you're consuming. I do have on Zoom several people that are available to speak. There's a youth and prevention program manager of Resist, which is part of the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, and someone who is willing to speak from the youth group. Her name is Louise Caron, C-A-R-O-N. And I also know that Nicole Brown is again with us on this call. And so I'd like to invite Louise Caron to speak if she would like to at this point in time.
Hi, thank you. My name is Louise and I'm here representing Resist. Resist is a statewide youth-led tobacco prevention program here in Kansas. I'm also on the State Youth Council representing Johnson County, and we actually have 4 local Resist chapters here in Johnson County who work on educating their peers about the harms of tobacco, preventing secondhand smoke exposure, and also denormalizing tobacco use. I think we should address the assumption that young people are not interested in using cigars, because not only have I actually witnessed teens using vape, but they also use cigars and cigarettes too. I think it's important to understand that when a new tobacco retailer opens up, teens will notice, especially in a smaller, close-knit community. And even research has shown that students who are in a community with a higher concentration of tobacco retailers, they're more likely to experiment with tobacco products, especially if that tobacco retailer is located near a school or somewhere where teens frequently hang out. The city of Mission has set a high standard for the rest of Johnson County when it comes to your clean indoor air law. And so if a change were to be made to this policy, it would hinder any progress that the city of Mission has already made to denormalize tobacco use. One change that may seem small could be opening the door for all kinds of tobacco retailers to open in your community. And next, you know, the whole city has completely reversed the progress they've made. So I would encourage this committee to not make any revisions to their current smoking ordinance. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise.
Thank you, Louise. I also would like to invite Sarah Prem. She's with the American Lung Association, and she's the individual who submitted the letter on behalf of the American Lung Association, if she'd like to speak.
Sure, thank you so much for this opportunity. I did want to echo what Councilmember Davis had said about, cigars do kind of get positioned as this sort of other product, but really they have the same addictive, toxic, carcinogenic compounds that are in cigarettes. As it was said, one cigar.
We can't just blatantly say false things like that, though. So I mean, if you're going to make statements like that, you should provide some.
I'd be happy to. I can provide.
I'm sorry to cut off, but I can't sit here and just watch a bunch of false statements being said. So,
Councilmember Schlossmacher, would you please allow my invited guest to speak before you argue with him?
I would also like to point out that I was told not to bring any guests tonight because I had some people that were willing to also come and talk. So I just want to make sure that we're being clear about that side of it. But I don't think it's fair to sit here and just like blatantly say false things. So I just want to call that out.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you. I'd be happy to send the references for this fact sheet that I'm talking about that the Lung Association has put together about cigars and their health effects. What was said earlier is that a cigar is the same amount of tobacco as an entire pack of cigarettes, a large cigar. You see that there are very similar health effects to cigar smoking as you see with cigarette smoking. 4 times the risk of dying of oral cancer, esophageal, laryngeal cancer, things like that. And to Louise's point, it does normalize this behavior and creates the impression for youth that encourages them or can, reduce their resistance to tobacco product adoption. So to that point, we would not, the American Lung Association would not recommend allowing this change to happen. And there was also reference to the distance. In the ordinance that was drafted, it talked about 200 feet, which is about 2/3 of a football field. And from our research, 1,000 feet would be the minimum to have it from a school or a park. So in short, the ordinance is probably not going to be in the best interest of the community. And I would also recommend that they not adopt it.
Thank you, Sarah. Anybody else?
I had a few questions, or at least one, for both of you. Are there studies or information, data around cities that do have smoking lounges, not vapes or anything like that, but specifically versus cities that don't?
What kind of data are you
just
asking
anything? I mean, so we're talking about the impact of having this smoking lounge that will, it has just the exception for cigars, and we'll have the restrictions of membership only and a few other things. But I didn't know if, like the city of Overland Park, if there were studies around the impact it had on the youth in that area compared to another city that didn't.
I am not aware of that, but I can certainly look into it.
I also know I asked some similar questions from the expert that was on our last meeting, and she also stated that she wasn't aware of any issues ever or any kind of trends or anything along with some of those other cities. Unfortunately, that was removed from the meeting minutes or wasn't captured there, but I thought it was pretty important to specifically ask that question. And there wasn't any evidence of any issues that have been raised there. So,
to make one comment, I want to, because I was involved at the very beginning when we created the smoking ordinance, and my concern at hand was the protection of the public at large, restaurants, public buildings, where everybody is impacted by people who smoke. This is not the case. This is potential for a standalone facility, membership only. It's like if I want to tell someone who drinks too much, you can't go in that bar. Well, we don't have that opportunity to be judges on that level. We are primarily looking at the rationale behind legal business, where revenue could occur. And I can't protect people from themselves. That's just not our role, I don't think. I may be off, but that's kind of how, and I've never smoked in my life, never want to. But we put the ordinance together at the beginning, and one of the first in the state, because we wanted to protect other people in the community. This doesn't lend itself to that. It's people who, that's the only thing they do is smoke cigars in that facility, and they're not around other people. So we kind of got to look at balance here before we go off on a particular opinion that's not necessarily affecting the community. It's affecting those that are in that little facility. I just think we kind of look at balance here.
I think we have enough data on indoor smoke, and these environments are going to have indoor smoke, and employees are going to be exposed to them. So it is a concern in terms of health. It's also a concern in terms of image for youth and so forth that I think is really not warranted.
I had a comment.
Go ahead, Trent.
I believe the expert from the last meeting didn't know of any complaints because she mentioned that her department was not the one that oversaw the complaints, and that it was the Kansas Department of Revenue. So that was one thing. The second thing was, I'm currently undecided on this. I can be convinced. I think that there are some pros. My main and cons, of course, but my main concern would be, I don't think I was on council yet, but I was in the gallery. You know, there was a girl from the high school who came and spoke about just kind of the preponderance of vaping and, you know, the ease of flavored cigarettes amongst her peers. And so I would really like to just make sure we kind of exhaust our options on shoring up those restrictions in our ordinance and making sure that we can try to limit the sale of those, especially to teens, as much. I think if we can do that, then, you know, the option of a standalone cigar bar that's based on membership with the appropriate spacing is a little more palpable to me, because, you know, I think that's a little bit of a different scenario. But I would like to, you know, really make sure that we can look into our how we're defining an e-cigarette and vaping, and just try to make sure we can limit that as well.
Thanks, Trent. Ron?
Do we have any regulations as far as, I mean, the gentleman that came last month talked about the system, the air handling system, the exhaust system. I don't see any of that mentioned in any of the data you gathered, Laura. But do we have ordinances that, I guess, if the cigar smoke is, I don't want to see it expelled into the community. So do we have any provision whereby we do require the higher end type ventilation systems?
Brian may have a better sense of that. I suspect our ordinances probably would not be that specific yet at this point. You know, from the research that we've conducted, and we can delve a little bit more into some of the other communities who have made the exception. You know, and particularly there are some communities, as we looked at their ordinances, that had specific requirements. So they clearly were grandfathering in certain, you know, certain retailers, which would probably indicate that there are some people that are not in standalone buildings. And so we can certainly delve a little bit more into, you know, those kinds of separate ventilation requirements, as well as if you are layering a standalone building requirement, if there is an additional enhancement to a ventilation system that others are required.
I can add to that too. If you're gonna open a place like this ever and you don't have a good air handling filtration system, you're not gonna last very long in that space. That's the mark of probably any good cigar shop I've been to, and you know, in that industry, that's a pretty big deal. So if you don't handle that well, that shop's not going to last long. It's not in the best interest of anybody who's looking to open a place like that to not have really good air handling and filtration. So.
And here's something to put out there. I may be off base, but I'm going to say this. Depending on what the market is for this type of a facility, obviously, if it's in a standalone building, the building probably can't be used for a variety of other uses. Do we have any idea in the community at large what the marketability is of a tobacco shop relative to cigars? I mean, do we have any idea before we would go to the point of putting air filtration systems, separate buildings, and things of that nature? On a business level, that's kind of how I would look at it. Maybe I'm off, but.
Well, I think that we need to define, first of all, if this is a retailer, is it a tobacco shop, and how is that going to be differentiated from any other tobacco shop? I mean, it sells 65%, you know, revenue in tobacco. So how are you going to craft an ordinance that allows for something that only sells cigars and no other tobacco? And so I think you're getting yourself into a situation where you're going to put staff in a difficult position to try to adjudicate some of these issues. And I don't think that that's really necessary.
I think we've got some really good, clear ordinance from some neighboring cities in the state law that's already in place. I mean, nobody's asking for any special exceptions to any kind of state law thing here either. I think really what what would make the most sense to me is just looking to pass something that's in line with the other communities right around our area in our same county, and right across the state line. And it's really what we're talking about here. And I'm not opposed to something more restrictive on the revenue requirements, or something more restrictive on vaping. I actually think that's probably a good idea. But the goal is to allow for a specific tobacco shop that will allow a small smoking lounge attached to it. That's it.
So that would.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I do think you can get at the definition piece if you put together the definition that one of the other sample cities had of vapor products, and then just like the definition of tobacco products says it excludes cigarettes, you would just exclude vapor products, the defined term. And then you're getting it really down to just cigars, and maybe like smoking pipe tobacco would be, I think, the only things left. But, and I think that would address at least not perhaps all, but some of the youth draw concerns with flavored tobacco products and vaping and those sorts of things.
Ken, go ahead. You had something else.
Well, I just think that what you're basically saying is that you're going to open this ordinance up and allow tobacco shops, because that's essentially what this would do. It would open it up. It doesn't matter whether it's cigars or not. The definition of what is being sold is tobacco. And so therefore, it could include hookah lounges. It could include any number of tobacco retailers that would fit that description. And so I think that's why I would not like to have this move forward. I would also ask if there's any conflict of interest in terms of Councilman Schlockmacher, who's the proponent of this, if he has any conflict of interest in terms of investment in this business, or has any intent to invest in this business, because I think that that's something that needs to be disclosed.
Yeah, I would certainly disclose that if that were the case, and I would certainly not be voting on anything. I'd be abstaining from any kind of vote, but that's not the case. I have no financial interest in this whatsoever. Just approached by a business owner that was potentially looking to move to our city, and happen to know them well, and I'm just trying to again make our laws in line with the neighboring cities, and in line with what's already there at the state level, to allow them to open a business and try to grow and expand their current business that they have. So as far as any kind of financial interests or anything, I'm not at all involved in that.
And Nick, you would be open to entertaining an ordinance with the additional restrictions that have been talked about tonight?
Yeah, the only thing I would say that we maybe want to be a little careful, and it's really just formality, but requiring a specific membership, although that could be $1 a year membership, whatever, it doesn't matter. But I just know with some of the places that operate, with Mike, who presented from Locale last time, they do operate in a membership model. A lot of the other places don't, but it just, so I guess in our ordinance, I don't know if it's worth giving that detail on it. But.
So I appreciate all of the discussion had here tonight, and I really appreciate the work that Louise and Nicole do, but I like how Councilmember Kring put it, we cannot save people from themselves. And with the restrictions that have been mentioned, membership, language around vaping and flavored tobaccos, with all those things in place, I would be in support of at least continuing this discussion.
Thanks, RC. Anybody else? Well, should we move to continue discussion to the next meeting, or what?
I mean, what about getting a sample, draft ordinance that we could look to move forward with, or?
I'm not. Well,
I think, go ahead, Councilmember Davis.
I'm not in favor of moving forward on this. I'd like some more discussion on it. And you've drafted elements of an ordinance already in terms of modification. There's some additional things that I would certainly put in, certainly in terms of distance and other things, but I am not accepting this as a proposal that I support at all.
So noted. Okay.
I still think that we should look to bring a draft ordinance to the next committee meeting and probably see if we can take it to council from there for an actual vote.
Laura, would you like to put something together that alleviates the vaping, e-cigarettes, and the whole entity of?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's several other things that I've heard some consensus around this evening that we would want to make additional modifications as this would go forward. I guess my biggest question would be, we can make those modifications and then what's the consensus around, do you want to see it again as a discussion item, or would you like to see it as an action item the next time it comes back to you?
Well, I think we need to look at it first. So I guess a discussion item.
And I would say discussion only because I have some concerns about how strictly our ability to include some of the provisions that you've discussed this evening. And so kind of with that feedback, I'd like to then really, dive into that legal review about, what opportunities we have there, because we certainly don't want to present something that then we can't, defend or support. So I think from that perspective, I would suggest that let's see what we can't incorporate based on this discussion. I'll get some legal feedback and then we can move forward from there.
Okay. Is anybody, Sollie, would you be willing to work with Laura on the legal aspects at all?
Yeah, we've got, I mean, obviously the retained city experts, but Laura, if you don't want to run up their bill and want to talk with me first, I'm happy to take a look at it too.
Wait, I know. I think we'll get advice from our city attorney. I'm not going to ask a city council member to step into that role. Certainly, you'll have the opportunity for discussion and feedback, but I don't think it's appropriate for you to be in that position. So
that's fair.
I'd like to just thank the guests that spoke,
both
Louise and Sarah, and I also appreciate Nicole being present as well.
Thank you. Okay, are we ready to move forward? I am.
Yeah, I think you're finished.
Okay, Ron, did you have something to share?
No, I think we're ready to adjourn.
Okay. It is now 9 o'clock, and with no further discussion, let's conclude the meeting of the Finance and Administration Committee. Again, this video will be made public on our website at missionks.org. Thank you for all participants and people in attendance.